Bill Nye, the Science Guy, debated Kinham from Answers in Genesis, and you brought the DVD in here, and his creation of viable model of origins in today's modern scientific era. That was the thesis they debated. And we want to look at just a few things that Bill Nye said in the debate, especially related to the fossil record, and get some commentary, get the other side, if you will, that maybe we could talk about in more detail. So what are some things Nye said you want to have people say, he said this, and here's the other side? Let's do that.
Yeah, Mr. Nye said quite a few things. He made quite a few assertions. We could just cover perhaps a few. But he obviously has never read, apparently, any creation literature or information, nor does he acknowledge that there are creationists, there are thousands of scientists throughout the world. He simply wouldn't acknowledge that,
right?
Claiming that, basically, if you're not a evolutionary scientist, you're not for real or something.
Yeah, similar to the mindset of Dawkins, who said if he found out his MD or his doctor that he was going to was a creationist, he would leave. He wouldn't let him treat him
on the basis he would not be qualified by holding this anti-scientific. Interesting.
I was there with Jeff Durbin, the beard ninja, or something that he wants to be called, at Gamage when Dawkins made that statement to Krauss, and we just looked at each other. But yeah, so I mean, that's what he says. So that was one reason why he wanted to do the debate, because he's worried, he says, about the future of America in relation to science education. And so...
yeah, sure. He kept hammering on the fact that throughout the debate that, to the extent that if you don't teach evolution exclusively in the public school systems, that we will fall behind in technology, and it would be economically, and it would be a bad thing for the United States. But what the fact is that in 1962, when they took the Bible and out of schools and replaced it exclusively with evolution theory in the schools, we've gone down from the number 1 or 2 place in the world in education-wise down to 22 now. We're down near the bottom of the list.
Yeah, so the relationship might be different than he presupposes. Well, what are some of the things he specifically said in relation to the study of geology, the study of paleontology, those kinds of things that we want to discuss here on the show today, Sal?
Yeah, well, let me give you basically a quote from what he said.
All right.
He said, and I quote, "If you can find an example, one example anywhere in the world, the scientists of the world would challenge you. They would embrace you, and you would be a hero, and you would change the world." And what he was referring to was if you could find an example of an out-of-place fossil anywhere in the world, because he talked about a fossil coming from the lower levels, the Cambrian strata, on up into the higher levels. So he believes there's no out-of-place fossil, that every fossil we find in the world represents an evolutionary progression of life.
He's saying that every fossil you would find essentially matches within the paradigm.
Exactly.
The evolutionary paradigm, right? The evolutionist paradigm.
Well, I mean, even on basic geology, there's a such thing as... they're technically termed anomalies, right? I mean, is he?
Of course.
I mean, doesn't that go against his thesis, or is he?
Well, he's completely. I don't think he's tried to purposely mislead, but he's completely ignorant of the geologic record and the fossil record.
So, when geologists talk about an anomaly, Sal, from an evolutionary perspective, what is that?
Well, there are major anomalies in the thousands. I mean, we're not talking about, 1 or 2. The largest anomaly starts right at the base of the fossil record in the Cambrian strata, which, for the audience, that's the lowest, most sedimentary rocks that contain fossils.
Okay.
And right there we have the largest anomaly you could imagine, because we have an explosion right there of invertebrate fossils,
right,
and other fossils which cover the majority of the major phyla of the world that exists today.
And they don't seem to have any evolutionary predecessors really in the fossil record. We did a show actually with Stephen Meyer on this, and I thought he did a great job of explaining the problem evolution has because of the Cambrian era explosion.
So that is the biggest anomaly right there. We're starting off the fossil record with an upside-down evolutionary tree. You know, they always show you the tree of life starting from some single-cell amoeba or something, and then developing gradually over millions of years into more complex forms and multiple species. But the tree is upside down because the top of the branches at the top start in the Cambrian.
Yeah, and then
nearly all the major branches of the tree are there at the very beginning.
So the framework is really theoretical more than it is geological.
Exactly. And so he talks about, well, if you could show me one out-of-place fossil, we got hundreds of millions of fossils that are out of place starting in the Cambrian strata.
All right. So, Jeremy, what's our time on this segment, my man? 30 seconds. All right. Good job, I guess. So back. Yeah. I mean, sounds good. I guess we can hand over to him there. All right. So, Sal, we're talking about the geological record as viewed by evolutionists, saying that there are differences from the story that's told and what we actually see in the dirt, as it were. Let's continue on that thought. Give people some maybe other examples of what's going on there.
Yeah, sure. There are major anomalies, and Bill Nye said if you could show him even one, he would consider changing his belief. But there's literally thousands.
Can I interrupt you there? I didn't see the debate. So with Ken Ham, when he said that, did Ken basically say, "Well, here's one," or what happened with that?
No, because the debate was such that each person presented their side of the story, like for 30 minutes of a time. So it wasn't like a tit for tat.
Okay.
See, and so Ken basically presented the creation position, Bill Nye his evolutionary position, and it was left up to people basically to make their decision for themselves, to weigh the information.
Right. Okay. So what are some other things he said that maybe we want to focus on, or some other anomalies? Like, for example, when I took Anthro 101 with a prof who was sort of an understudy from actually Johansson at ASU, we were going through this portrayal of the geological column and the way the strata are viewed and index fossils and all these things, and how it clearly takes a long time to lay down each layer is the way it was presented. And I said, Professor, what would you say about polystratic fossils, polystrates? And she said, I don't know what you mean. What do you mean? And I said, well, example, like the trees that'll go through several layers, and it appears clear that it couldn't have been millions of years that they're laid down because these fossils are extending through multiple layers. So how could that be? I don't really understand how, but the professor didn't understand what I was saying. Like the term polystrat fossils didn't immediately register. Can you help us out on that? What are those, and what evidence do you think they provide?
Well, it's amazing that the professor had no idea what you were talking about, because, I mean, this is a major contention of the geologic record and creationists. Polystrate fossils are basically fossils, particularly tree trunks that stand up vertically through multiple layers of strata. You're talking about from a few tens of feet to almost 100 feet in some cases of these tree trunks.
And how was a layer viewed upon an evolutionary model?
Well, 100-foot layer of like shale and sandstone in an evolutionary model could take hundreds of thousands of years or more.
So then what's the problem with these polystrates?
Well, I mean, how is a tree going to be sitting up there straight, waiting 100,000 years to be buried? It's impossible. So this is just one evidence among numerous types of evidences. You have mega breccias.
What's that?
These are breccias that contain gigantic boulders of rock that are floating in a matrix of usually finer sand and stuff.
What's that mean, though? I've never heard of this.
What that indicates that these were laid down under catastrophic high-energy conditions. They weren't sitting there over millions of years. These boulders being covered.
So how do they kind of get there is the question.
Right, because they're in a matrix, sitting in a matrix, not all at the bottom.
Okay, right. Okay. Well, Sal, they can get out of that matrix by taking the properly colored pill.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay. But go ahead. Continue
on. There's many evidences. You have turbidites, which are shown to be rapid deposition of sediments that could extend for hundreds of miles throughout the geologic record.
So you would say, hey, folks, this is good evidence of
rapid deposition, not a slow accumulation.
Which would indicate what?
Well, that the contained fossils themselves are indicative of rapid deposition, because if you look out over the deserts today, we know in past recent history there are tens of thousands of buffaloes were slaughtered, let's say.
Right.
And we don't find hardly a bone anywhere, no less a fossil of a buffalo anywhere. Kangaroos, you're not going to find any fossils in Australia or there.
The conditions are not right.
No, because when an animal falls over and dies, number one, it becomes oxidized. The scavengers get at it, usually tear it apart, and then what's left, the bacteria take care of. Everybody knows that dead carcasses and animals and plants disintegrate in a very short time, a matter of months. At the most a few years, so they don't become petrified fossils. All the billions of fossils that are entombed worldwide in the sediments speak of a very rapid burial worldwide.
So this rapid burial would be what event in the Earth's history?
Well, that would be the biblical worldwide flood is the only thing that could account for tens or thousands of feet of sedimentary rock containing fossils all over the earth.
But the evolutionist says no because
they insist that they had insisted in the past that they were covered very slowly over thousands and hundreds of thousands of years. But now they're actually backing off and recognizing that many of the rock strata around the earth indicate a catastrophic rapid deposition, and they're backing off. But what they do to maintain the paradigm of millions of years, they're called neo-catastrophists, they're admitting that, yes, this was a catastrophe, yes, that was a catastrophe, yes, this happened rapidly, but between those are millions of years of quiet periods.
So a little boom here, a little bump there, but nothing like a global flood.
That's still a pretty significant admission, isn't it?
I would imagine so.
It is, because prior to 10, 15 years ago, until creationists are pointing all these out, they wouldn't even admit that or recognize it.
Now, I know one of the big points that's often made is this idea of transitional forms. And growing up, Lucy was the big one that I was taught about, and as an example of a form going from ape to human. I know one was mentioned during the debate. Maybe in the next segment we can talk a little bit about the evidence, or really lack of evidence for that.
Yeah, let's hold that because we're about to come up on a hard break. When we come back, Sal, would you feel prepared to discuss Tiktaalik?
Sure, let's do that.
And I've even got a little song specifically picked out for that. So a little bit of feedback before we close out this segment. This is from Randy Chesley from Oregon, commenting on the debate with Seth Andrews. He said, "You should try getting a debate with anyone from the Reasonable Doubts podcast. They will grind you up and spit you out." So I told Randy online on Facebook, I said, could you please set it up? Because I don't really know who these guys are that he's saying. I said, well, set it up and we could do it. So Randy or Reasonable Doubts folks, we're willing to talk to you if you're willing to talk to us. And when we come back, we'll continue to talk to Mr. Sal Giardina about evolution, creation, and the fossil record. I just want to tell Mr. Tiktaalik this is nothing personal. Okay, go ahead.
Mr. Nye did. He claimed that a fossil named Tiktaalik was actually proof of a transition, from a fish to a tetrapod amphibian. And again, his information is clearly outdated because scientists, even recently in recent publications, and these are evolutionary, non-creationist publications in journals, have established that Tiktaalik is basically dead as an argument for Darwinian evolution.
What are the reasons they give for that?
And some of the reasons is that when Tiktaalik is basically like a cousin of the Chrysopterygerian lobe-fin fish.
Could you say they're paisan?
Right.
Hey, paisan! What up, Tiktaalik?
Which was found, off the waters of Madagascar. In other words, there was such a similar type fish, a lobe-finned fish, which is found living today.
Yeah.
So it was supposed to be extinct for 60 million years, but there's no evolutionary indication at all of any evolution, and the fish is perfectly happy to swim around with the same lobe fins as Tiktaalik.
And is that the coelacanth? Is that how you say that guy's name?
The coelacanth has been known since about 1938 or something, and people catch it and eat it in fish markets, I believe. In any case, we know that there's been no evolution of this fish, so the idea of the 60 million years or evolutionary change, there's something definitely missing there. Now, when we look at Tiktaalik, it's been shown that the bones, it does have some bones in its fins,
all right,
lobe fins. They're fleshy fins, but they're not attached in any way to the spine, nor does it have any kind of mechanism to appear where those fins can be used to walk on.
Right. So it has the bones, but it's not for walking.
It's not. Yeah, they're just several bones in the fins. That's all.
These bones aren't made for walking.
No, they're not made for walking. And this has been pointed out even by evolutionary scientists. And the structures of the tetrapod. Let's put it this way too. There's also fossils of walking amphibians. We have fossils of amphibians that predate Tiktaalik by several millions of years, according to the evolutionary time scheme.
Right.
But they predate Tiktaalik.
So how could that be a transitionary form once it's already happened?
Yeah. Right.
He's like, hey, guys, here I am. They're like, dude, you're like 60 million years late. Bro, a little late to the walking party.
Tiktaalik's a little bit late, on the scene. And so, it just doesn't hold up under scrutiny.
And it can't hold up on ground either, because from what I remember reading a little bit about this.
Let me read you a quote from not a creation scientist, but here's a paleontologist, Jennifer Clack from the University of Cambridge in the UK. And here's what she said. We thought we pinned down the origin of limbed tetrapods. We have to rethink the whole thing, unquote.
Yeah, and a big problem with all this is that, I think it's a point we've made before in other shows. I mean, there should be millions of transitional fossils, right? I mean,
it should be falling over them almost in the fossil record.
I mean, considering sort of how many species do we have on Earth, we should see them all over the place in terms of showing the transition of one species into another species, and yet that's not the case.
We have over 250 million fossils cataloged and identified in universities and the major museums of the world. 9 out of 10 of them should be in some form of transition of evolution were true.
Right, but there's not a whole lot of changing going on. When we come back with Sal Giardina, we'll do our last segment on evolution, creation, and the fossil record here. We talked a little bit about Tiktaalik. Now let's talk a little about some other things we find within the fossil record that maybe even came out of the debate with Bill Nye Kinham. Some other things you want to bring to the listeners' attention in relation to that, Mr. Sal, the floor is yours.
Well, what most people don't know is that, the so-called era of the reptiles or dinosaurs, which is the Mesozoic era, which is the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous periods from which the movie Jurassic Park was made.
Right.
What they don't know is that this is not an era of reptiles or dinosaurs, but it's been clearly shown at many times over, and particularly by Dr. Carl Werner, who went worldwide looking at the major fossil dinosaur digs worldwide. Mm-hmm. He went to over 60 museums and photographed the fossils that are found in the Mesozoic strata, mm-hmm. and found that there's countless thousands, not hundreds, but thousands of mammals buried with the dinosaurs, which you never find in museums because, according to evolution, the mammals evolved, millions of years after the reptiles. They were an evolutionary offspring of the reptiles, so to speak. And so talk about out of place fossils
Right.
that Bill Nye said. There's literally thousands and thousands of these fossils that you could recognize today.
Yeah, what are some examples of some of our mammalian friends we would find hanging out?
You would find, and he has lists and lists of these, and they're all photographed.
Right.
But there are ducks, squirrels, platypuses, beaver-like and badger-like animals. There's are found crocodiles, cockroaches, frogs, not to mention all the vegetation, which we could recognize as living trees today. We could recognize these fossils to the genera and even to the species that are living today. So, and there's thousands of them.
Right.
So the idea that they, it took millions of years to produce mammals after reptiles is just completely bogus, because it's not an era of reptiles. The dinosaurs simply went extinct. But in the Mesozoic era, which is supposedly hundreds of millions of years ago, we could identify basically almost all the animals we see living today.
Yes, got to watch the Weird Al video about Jurassic Park is frightening after dark. All these creatures running wild. Okay, so we want to talk about some other stuff that Bill Nye said in the debate with Ken Ham. You mentioned during break something in relation to the sun, and I thought that was interesting. What did he say, and what do you want to say in relation to it, Sal?
Well, Bill, Mr. Nye, he claimed that the energy of the sun can provide the impetus, the energy in an open system of the earth to synthesize molecules into life, into the first life forms. Now, anyone who is an engineer or physicist understand that this is a direct contradiction to the second law of thermodynamics. Basically, the whole idea of biologic evolution is simply what I would call a biologic perpetual motion machine.
Okay.
Now, if you were to go to any engineer that you come up to, and I'm a mechanical engineer, and say, well, I have a device that I invented that will, once it starts, you start it in motion, it will operate perpetually without any further energy source. That's called a perpetual motion machine. They've been proposed for, millenniums.
Right.
People have come up with everything. But any engineer worth his salt won't even look at it.
Right.
Because he knows it's an impossibility.
Right.
In this universe, anyway.
Well, this will sound dumb, but okay, strictly, so thinking of the physics or the engineering, why is it impossible within this framework?
Well, because every machine that operates with moving parts is going to dissipate energy through heat loss. And the heat loss will run it down, and it's going to slow down and stop.
And so that's why the parts will break, for example.
They
things
break,
like
they
that.
wear out, and the energy stops. So unless you have a constant energy supply, see. Well, his claim was that the sun provides a constant energy supply to the open system, and therefore it basically is a contradiction to the second law of thermodynamics.
So the open system would be the Earth and I guess the moon as well?
And the sun.
Okay.
The sun's energy radiating on the earth.
Okay. And so his claim is that provides the energy you need for, in essence, a perpetual motion machine?
Yeah, for perpetual motion and to synthesize the first molecules into life. But what he's completely missing is that raw energy is a destructive force.
Right.
Man has never harnessed raw energy like lightning or an explosion or anything like that into synthesizing anything that is profitable. In fact, it's destructive.
Right.
The only way we are able to utilize energy to synthesize and produce more complex items is through a machine.
All right, so can you give us an example, like what do we do? How do we get, because people might say, well, wait, didn't Benjamin Franklin, they might kind of, don't we do that from lightning or storms or wind? But there's an intermediary there, isn't there?
Yeah, you have to have some kind of engineered device to harness the energy and transform it into some kind of useful work safely.
Right.
All raw energy is like a bull in a china closet.
Right.
You're going to expend a lot of energy, but nothing is going to come of it except destruction,
Yeah.
So this is a fundamental principle of science and mechanical engineering and all engineering, that you have to have a machine to harness energy safely and produce it. And the basic machines of the earth are photosynthesis, are the plants. But the plants are complex machines. They turn sunlight into carbohydrates and proteins, and they do build the basic forms of life from which the start of the food chain starts. But these machines, photosynthesis, are extremely complex machines that had to be there from the very beginning.
Yeah, so there had to be that symbiotic relationship from jump. And even thinking about the process of photosynthesis, imagine the evolutionary steps it would take to get there. But here's the thing. You would already have to have it in place for it to even be in place. It's kind of like it needs itself. Maybe we'd call it irreducibly complex.
Absolutely. Photosynthesis, the more scientists look into it, and I'm not a chemist as such, but the more scientists look into it, it just gets more complex and more complex. It is not a simple mechanism.
Right. And the point is that's what you would need for the sun to be able to do the work that Mr. Nye wants to say it can do.
Exactly.
And with Mr. Nye, he says that in order to then just take God out of the equation of the creation of life, or what's the grand conclusion?
Well, the conclusion is he believes that energy plus time produces life.
Okay, so
without
therefore,
God.
Yeah, okay, so God is not needed. That's the grand conclusion, right?
Right.
Okay.
And to put him in the mix, so to speak, is bad science and damaging to our long-term educational goals in America was, I think, his main point. What is the biblical foundation, and how does it comport what we're saying? We mentioned briefly the flood, for example. I mean, can you help us understand, for example, about created kinds, or what God has done in creation, or what the flood means, those kinds of things, just to say, okay, here's what the Scripture says about it, and here's why the Christian needs to be faithful even as they do science. Help us to understand that as we close out the show.
Well, the opening words of the Bible start out with, in the beginning, God. I mean, that he's there in the beginning, right, and before the beginning of the entire universe, and he is the author of time, space, and matter.
Word.
And what we know now from the conventional view of the universe, everybody believed that the universe consists of time, space, and matter. Mm-hmm. But what they don't realize is there's also a fundamental property called information.
Yeah.
And without that information, there would be no life, because that information is stored, as you know, in the DNA of every living cell, almost every living cell.
Yeah.
And so in the beginning is time, space, matter, and information. Well, information only comes from an intelligence. So we go back to the first words. In the beginning, God.
Right.
He is the author of intelligence.
Yeah.
He is the origin of intelligence.
And it's either God or dirt.
Amen. That's the name of the book.
That's what my book. Before you get through the first few chapters, you're going to have to come to the grips with the fact that you're either going to believe in an eternal God or eternal dirt.
All right. Well, Sal Giardina, thanks for being our guest today.